On a quiet suburban street in Wetumpka, Alabama, one family's American dream was about to become a waking nightmare. In 2017, 44-year-old Susan Osborne and her son Evan suddenly went silent, their phones powered down forever. Their futures were erased. When worried family knocked on their door, Susan's husband claimed she had simply left him for another man, but his story kept changing. And soon, neighbors would report the sound of gunshots in the night and the smell of strange, massive fires burning for days. What was he so desperately trying to destroy? Welcome to Beyond the Crime. Like the video and subscribe to the channel to support us. Let's dive in. Susan Lynn Osborne was born on August 22, 1972. She grew up in a typical American household with two brothers, Brian and Jason, and a sister named Nancy. The family was calm and stable. Her parents worked hard to create a cozy, secure environment. From a young age, Susan stood out as independent, sociable, and friendly. She was especially close to her mother, Linda, and even as an adult, maintained warm relationships with her siblings. After her marriage in 2005, Susan relocated from Michigan to Alabama. On June 25, 2002, her son Evan was born. But the marriage didn't last, and Susan ended up on her own. She chose not to go back to her family and decided to start anew in Alabama. Later, she had a daughter, Anna Grace, with another partner. That relationship also fell apart, and Susan devoted several years to a long, grueling battle for custody of Anna Grace. As a single mom, she poured herself into raising her children. Despite everyday challenges, she remained mentally steady, kind-hearted, patient, and energetic, determined to give Evan a stable upbringing. He grew up surrounded by love and attention, curious, hard-working, and a little shy. At school, he was respected for his intelligence and maturity. He loved science, played chess, and showed real promise. Managing his health needs required regular monitoring and some medications. Around 2009, a woman named Holly moved in across the street from Susan. Both single mothers, they quickly bonded. Soon, they were inseparable, supporting each other, spending time together, and talking every day. That friendship would play a significant role in what was to come. Later, Jerry Michael Osborne entered Susan's life. A former U.S. Air Force airman, he had been discharged due to disciplinary issues. His fellow service members described him as hot-tempered, inclined toward aggression, and resistant to authority. After his service, he worked as an emergency dispatcher on base. He was known to struggle with post-traumatic stress and was suspicious, withdrawn, and controlling. That's how the lives of Susan, Evan, and Jerry began to intersect, and everything that had seemed ordinary started to unravel. In the summer of 2013, Susan and Evan spent a day by the water. Fishing was their shared passion. They even made their own tackle. That day, Jerry Michael Osborne happened to be there. A spontaneous conversation began. Jerry introduced himself, spoke briefly with Susan, and then left. But a few days later, he appeared. Again. Their interactions soon became routine, and he began taking more initiative. He bonded easily with Evan, inviting him to play, discussing fishing gear, and asking about school. Within a couple of months, they were meeting regularly. That fall, Susan and Evan moved in with Jerry. His home was located on Waterview Drive, a quiet street in Wetumpka, with direct access to the Coosa River. The area was remote, a private road surrounded by trees. The house sat on a spacious lot set back from the road. Susan liked the location, peaceful, close to nature, away from the hustle and bustle of town life. Evan spent more time outside, exploring the outdoors and helping his mom around the property. 6 months later, in January 2014, Susan and Jerry got married. There were no invitations or guests. Even close friends and family weren't informed ahead of time. Holly and the rest of the family only found out later. Jerry and Susan simply announced they were officially husband and wife. When asked why they'd chosen to do it this way, they said they wanted a quiet, simple ceremony. Despite the surprise, Susan never gave anyone reason to worry. On the surface, everything seemed fine. In the first few months after the wedding, life appeared to be without complications. Jerry continued working as a dispatcher for emergency services at the nearby military base. Susan focused on the household and the kids. Evan did well in school, kept things tidy, and helped with chores. The family had 2 dogs, Sugar and Schnoo. On weekends, they'd go fishing, cook meals together, and tend the yard. Gradually, Jerry started upgrading the home, buying new furniture, replacing appliances, and making small repairs. The house near the Coosa River looked like the perfect place to start fresh. The windows overlooked the water, and in the evenings, you could hear crickets chirping. The neighborhood was considered safe, and the neighbors were friendly. Susan finally seemed to have found stability again. A home, a family, a sense of peace. It felt like a well-earned new chapter after years of struggle. After their 2014 wedding, life on Waterview Drive appeared calm from the outside. But gradually, Jerry's behavior began to shift. At first, the changes were subtle. He started asking Susan to stay home more often, encouraging her not to work, saying he made enough and wanted her to focus on the family. Eventually, those requests became demands. Susan left her job and soon became entirely dependent on her husband, both financially and in day-to-day matters. Over time, Jerry began limiting her contact with the outside world. He would often listen in on phone conversations, ask her to use the speakerphone, and insist on being present when she spoke to her family or her friend Holly. Later, he began checking her incoming and outgoing messages. Susan's communication with her brothers, sister, and mother gradually faded. Her social life nearly vanished. Her ability to leave the house became restricted too. Jerry insisted on personally driving her to and from even the smallest errands, often waiting outside to bring her back. Visits with Holly, once frequent, became rare, and when they did meet, Holly noticed a shift. Susan had become more cautious, avoided direct eye contact at times, and didn't always feel free to speak openly. Jerry worked hard to maintain the appearance of a normal life. In public, he was polite, calm, and showed no signs of aggressive behavior. He didn't say much to outsiders, but came across as friendly. At home, though, things were different. His behavior became increasingly unpredictable. He would vanish for days without explanation. When Susan asked where he had been, he'd give vague answers, talking about assignments or gathering information, supposedly tied to her ongoing legal efforts concerning her daughter. In September 2016, Jerry vanished for several days without telling anyone his plans. He wasn't answering his phone, didn't reply to messages, and seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Worried and unsure of what to think, Susan reported him missing to local law enforcement. But when she checked their shared account with the phone provider, she found that Jerry had been actively using his phone during the time he was supposedly missing. There were multiple calls, including 2 to a taxi service. Later, Jerry sent Susan a photo of a house, claiming he had been on a mission to gather information about the family of her former partner. It didn't add up. Susan realized he was lying. Shortly before that, Jerry had listed Susan's boat for sale. It was her personal project, something she had been restoring with her own hands, and it held deep personal meaning for her. By the time she found out, the boat was already up on Craigslist. It was another red flag. Jerry had begun making decisions about her belongings without her knowledge or permission. As Jerry's control escalated, Susan found herself losing more and more autonomy. Her decisions were constantly second-guessed or overridden. He took charge of her communication, her finances, where she went, what she bought, and even what she wore. Step by step, he was tightening the grip. Not through open aggression, but by building a closed world around her that was increasingly hard to escape. Susan rarely spoke about what was happening behind closed doors. When she canceled plans or stopped answering, she would say she was tired or busy. Holly, her closest friend, began to notice changes. Susan started using email instead of texting, which seemed odd given their close friendship. Later, Holly would understand it was Susan's attempt to communicate without being watched. That fall, Susan discovered that Jerry was secretly seeing another woman, someone named Brittany. From what she found in his messages, he had spent an evening with her, visiting a club and staying overnight at a hotel. Susan took screenshots of the messages and sent them to Holly, her only trusted confidant. Holly confirmed her suspicions and invited Susan to bring Evan and Anna Grace and stay with her in Florida for a while to get away and think things through. Susan said she'd consider it but wasn't ready to make that move just yet. Then, around January, Susan made another shocking discovery. She came across a profile for Jerry on a website known for adult escort listings targeting male clients. The page featured a photo of Jerry in his underwear, his face not shown, but his distinctive tattoos were clearly visible. The description pointed to services intended for men, and the phone number listed matched Jerry's. At first, Susan hoped it was old information. The profile had been created in 2011, before they met and in another state. But after reviewing the page closely, she realized the activity on the account was recent. The conversations were ongoing during their marriage. She sent the link and screenshots to Holly. That was the breaking point. Susan now knew Jerry had been lying, not just about his mysterious trips and messages to other women, but about an entire hidden life. Any hope she had of explaining things away collapsed under the weight of undeniable evidence. In a conversation with Holly, she admitted she couldn't stay in the marriage any longer and planned to file for divorce. To create some distance, Susan moved into a separate bedroom. A few days later, Jerry started asking why she wasn't sleeping beside him. He wanted to know what had changed. Susan didn't come right out and say she had seen the website. Instead, she asked indirect questions about certain names, messages, and dates. Jerry denied everything. He insisted he had never been in contact with any men, that the conversations weren't his, and that it was all false. He dodged questions, changed the subject, and refused to acknowledge anything. Discovering the truth about Jerry's secret life hit Susan hard, not just emotionally, but with a sense of real danger. She realized she now knew too much. In the spring of 2017, Susan and Holly were regularly talking about Holly's upcoming wedding. Holly had recently moved to Florida, where her fiancé worked with the Coast Guard. The ceremony was planned for Key West, and Susan was set to be the maid of honor. They were discussing the date, the travel plans, and dress details. Evan was going to join his mom on the trip, a chance to get away and relax. The two women spoke almost every day. Nothing pointed to any imminent crisis. The last week of May started off as normal. On May 26th, Susan went to see her daughter, Anna Grace, who was living with her father. Later that day, she called Holly and mentioned that a letter had arrived at her house, addressed to Holly's old address. Susan promised to forward it by mail the following week. That same day, Evan stayed home from school. He wasn't feeling well. During their conversations, Susan gave no sign that anything was wrong. On May 28th, Susan and Holly talked again by phone. Everything seemed routine. The next day, Memorial Day, May 29th, they exchanged text messages, chatting about everyday things. Nothing unusual. That evening, Holly sent another message. This time, there was no reply. At first, she didn't think much of it, assuming Susan was busy. But when there was still no response the following day, she started to worry. On May 30th, Holly tried calling Susan, but no one picked up. She kept texting and calling throughout the day. Meanwhile, Susan's other relatives were also trying to reach her. Soon, both Susan's and Evan's phones went straight to voicemail. No calls, no social media activity, no bank card usage. Total silence. That same day, May 30th, Susan's younger daughter, Anna Grace, came by the house on Waterview Drive with her paternal grandmother. Evan had a medical appointment scheduled, and Anna Grace wanted to drop something off for him. But instead of Susan, they were met by Jerry. He was visibly agitated, sweating, and told them they couldn't come inside because the house was a mess. He claimed that Susan had left him, taken Evan, and gone off with another man. He didn't offer any details and grew irritated when questioned. The visit ended with him shutting the door on them. The next day, Evan missed his medical appointment. That was a huge red flag. The procedure required advanced preparation, and Susan had always been diligent about his care. She never missed anything related to his health. For Holly, this was the moment she knew something was wrong. Susan had never disappeared without warning. Even going 1 or 2 days without contact was unusual for her. Now it had been several days, and there was still no word. Not from Susan, not from Evan. Holly kept messaging daily. At one point, she tried calling Jerry, but he didn't answer. The family began to realize this wasn't a spontaneous getaway. It didn't feel like Susan had run away or taken off unexpectedly. This felt like a hard, abrupt stop, one that left no trace. Weeks went by. Family members kept calling and sending messages. At the end of June, Susan's mother mailed her a letter. Eventually, it came back, stamped undeliverable. Then, on July 28, 2017, exactly 2 months after the last confirmed contact with Susan and Evan, they were officially reported as missing. At that point, the Elmore County Sheriff's Office became involved. Their first step was routine for this type of situation: a wellness check, an initial review of family dynamics. 2 officers were sent to the house on Waterview Drive to find out where Susan and her son were and why they had suddenly vanished. At the door, they were met by Jerry Osborne. He made it clear right away that he wasn't prepared for a visit. He said he was in the middle of cleaning and asked them to keep things brief. When asked about Susan and Evan, Jerry stated that they had left 2 months earlier. According to him, on Memorial Day, May 29th, he and Susan had a disagreement, after which she packed up, took Evan, and left. He claimed a man was waiting for them outside in a truck. Susan and Evan supposedly got in the vehicle and disappeared, and he hadn't seen them since. Jerry described the man as tall, dark-haired, with a beard and sunglasses. But the details were vague and inconsistent. In one version, he said he didn't know who the man was. In another, he claimed it was Susan's brother, Brian. He also changed his description of the vehicle, calling it a truck in one version and a silver Nissan SUV in another. Nothing he said could be verified. Police pulled bank records and phone logs. From May 30th onward, there was complete digital silence. There were no signs that Susan or Evan had been active anywhere. Their passports remained unused, and there were no flight records under either name. Even more concerning, Evan's prescriptions, which required regular refills, had not been renewed. No doctor visits, no pharmacy requests. That was a major red flag. Without ongoing treatment, his health could be at risk. The officers working the case noted all the inconsistencies in Jerry's account. None of his statements lined up with any evidence. He hadn't tried to reach out to Susan's family, hadn't filed a report, and showed no urgency to find them. For someone who had lived under the same roof with Susan and her son, his behavior raised serious concerns. Investigators began to suspect that this wasn't just a case of someone walking away. Everything pointed to the theory that the story of Susan leaving was a cover. But without witnesses, without physical evidence, and without any confirmed sightings, proving otherwise was legally impossible. All they could do was document every contradiction and continue working to reconstruct the chain of events that led to Susan and Evan disappearing. During the initial walkthrough of the house on Waterview Drive, officers didn't note any signs of a struggle, but one detail stood out. None of Susan's or Evan's personal belongings were in the home. No clothes, no documents, not even everyday items, as if the two of them had never lived there at all. A second visit to the home, this time with a search warrant, took place after inconsistencies in Jerry's statements raised further concerns, and the family's sense of alarm grew. By then, the house on Waterview Drive had undergone significant changes. The floors had been replaced, walls were repainted, and several rooms had been fully renovated. Jerry claimed he simply decided it was time for home improvements. He explained that Susan had supposedly written offensive messages on the walls before leaving, and he had no choice but to paint over them. However, investigators found no evidence of spray paint or markings anywhere in the home. There were no cans, no residue, nothing to support his claim. Officers suspected the renovations were meant to cover up something else. Jerry also said he removed the hardwood floors himself and replaced them with carpet because a contractor had offered him a discount for doing the demolition on his own. But investigators later confirmed that the company in question did not have any such discount program. Jerry's payment records showed that he purchased paint, adhesive, carpeting, and other materials during the first week of June after Susan and Evan had gone missing. Neighbors later came forward with disturbing observations. On the night of May 29th into May 30th, they heard what sounded like gunshots. The next day, Jerry was seen burning something in his yard. The fires were unusually large, producing thick smoke and intense heat. One neighbor even said he could feel the warmth from his own property. Jerry kept the fires going for several days. No one could say exactly what was being burned, but the activity seemed suspicious. Around the same time, Jerry's father was seen on the property. He would arrive in the morning, help with the fires, then leave. Jerry later claimed they were simply getting rid of old flooring and construction debris. But the timing, beginning right after Susan and Evan vanished, was concerning. Another troubling detail was the disappearance of the two family dogs, Sugar and Schnoo. They went missing shortly after the events of late May. Then, on June 12th, both animals were found at a local shelter. Jerry had turned them in himself. While filling out the intake form, he made an unusual mistake. He listed one of the dogs under the name Susan. Staff at the shelter found this unsettling. Even more concerning, he claimed the dogs were strays, though records clearly showed they were family pets. Investigators also discovered that Jerry had removed the home's original security camera system shortly after the disappearances. Cameras that once lined the perimeter were taken down and replaced with a new setup. He said the system needed an upgrade, even though the old one was still functioning properly. Authorities noted that the original surveillance footage might have captured who visited the home during that critical time. But the original files and hardware had been completely erased. Nothing was left. It was also confirmed that Jerry had been transporting construction waste and other unknown materials to Maxwell Air Force Base, where he worked as a civilian employee. He disposed of items in the base's dumpsters without authorization. When questioned, he said it was just leftover material from remodeling, but no other personnel at the base could confirm that he had permission to do so. He carried out the dumping alone and without anyone else's knowledge. To investigators, Jerry's actions looked like a calculated effort to clean everything up, to remove traces, eliminate anything suspicious, and destroy potential evidence. Every step he took appeared aimed at erasing something. After the initial searches failed to produce direct evidence, the Elmore County Sheriff's Office authorized a more advanced forensic investigation. In early July 2017, they conducted a detailed search of the property using luminol. Investigators identified around 20 separate stains and smears of biological origin. The traces were found in 3 areas of the house: the kitchen, the bathroom, and the laundry room. To the naked eye, everything looked spotless. It had all been thoroughly cleaned. But luminol reacts to even the smallest biological particles left behind after intense scrubbing. The size and pattern of the stains suggested that significant physical trauma may have occurred in those spaces. All collected samples were sent in for DNA analysis. A few weeks later, the results came back. The biological material matched Susan Lynn Osborne and her son Evan. This became the first scientific confirmation that a violent incident had occurred in the home, one in which both Susan and Evan were harmed. These findings directly contradicted Jerry's version of events, that Susan and Evan had left the house unharmed. At the same time, search teams brought in trained scent-tracking dogs to examine the property and surrounding area. The dogs responded strongly to a utility shed located at the far end of the backyard. Both dogs reacted the same way, showing heightened interest at the door and signaling their handlers with behavior consistent with detecting a target scent. Despite this, a detailed inspection of the shed turned up nothing. It was dismantled, but no remains or physical evidence were found inside. Search efforts expanded. Police combed through the property along the Coosa River, visually inspecting the shoreline and surrounding woods. Drones were deployed, along with search and rescue volunteers and dive teams. Despite extensive effort, no physical remains of Susan or Evan were found. There was still no direct evidence of a crime, but the weight of circumstantial indicators kept building. What had started as a missing persons case was becoming a potential criminal investigation, all signs pointing back to one home, one person, and one night. Jerry Osborne refused to provide any statements. He hired legal counsel and invoked his right not to testify, cutting off all communication with law enforcement. Over time, he ignored every attempt by investigators and Susan's family to contact him, whether by phone, mail, or in person. Meanwhile, the investigation continued, but without bodies, eyewitnesses, or concrete proof of what exactly happened. Prosecutors were unable to move forward with charges due to a lack of conclusive evidence. While police had gathered a significant amount of circumstantial material, it wasn't legally strong enough to confirm that Susan and Evan had become victims of a crime. That legal gray area allowed Jerry to remain free. 37 days after Susan disappeared, Jerry filed for divorce. In the paperwork, he stated that the marriage had ended and that his wife had left the home. Because Susan could not be present or respond to the filing, the court granted the divorce quickly and without objection. Soon after, Jerry began selling off belongings and eventually sold the house on Waterview Drive, despite it being at the center of an active investigation. The new owner had no connection to the case, and from that point forward, law enforcement would need a new warrant to search the property again. Jerry moved to the nearby town of Prattville, about a 30-minute drive from Wetumpka, and began a new relationship. According to what investigators and Susan's family could learn, his new partner had no publicly known information about his past. Authorities and relatives feared she may have been unaware of the suspicions surrounding the disappearance of his previous family. Jerry kept a low profile, avoided public attention, refused interviews, and made no statements to the press. Each year on May 29th, the day Susan and Evan were last seen, a memorial vigil is held in Wetumpka. Friends, neighbors, and family gather near the river, not far from the house where they lived in their final years. Candles are set afloat on the water, and short speeches are shared. These gatherings serve not only as a remembrance but also as a quiet form of pressure on local authorities, a way of reminding them that the case is still open and demands closure. Within the Wetumpka community, there is little doubt that Susan and Evan didn't leave voluntarily. Their disappearance is seen as a heartbreaking event that shook the entire area. While Jerry has not been charged, he is widely regarded as the only person who may hold the answers. Years have passed since Susan and Evan went missing, and the case remains open. It hasn't been closed, but it hasn't progressed either. The absence of physical remains remains the biggest barrier to holding anyone accountable. Still, the family continues to fight. They believe that one day, the truth will come to light. Someone will speak up, or new evidence will surface. And when that happens, their disappearance will no longer be a mystery but a solved crime with a named perpetrator. For now, though, the truth remains hidden, just like everything else that happened that night of May 29, 2017, inside the house on Waterview Drive. If this deep dive is the kind of content you value, please like and subscribe. It makes all the difference. See you next time.